The Usurper's crown, the midnight bells of Makai tolled 13 times, their bronze voices echoing through the twisted spires of the demon realm. In her obsidian palace, Morrigan Aensland stood before a mirror that reflected not her physical form, but the very essence of her soul, a writhing mass of emerald fire and shadow that pulsed with ancient power. Tonight something felt different. The air itself seemed to whisper warnings in languages that predated human speech. "Mistress," came a voice like grinding stone from the doorway. One of her lesser demons, a creature of horn and sinew, bowed low. "There is a visitor. She claims to be your sister." Morrigan's reflection flickered, the emerald flames dancing with amusement. "Sister? How delightfully presumptuous. Send her up." The creature shuffled away, leaving Morrigan alone with her thoughts. In the centuries since her father Belial's death, she had grown accustomed to pretenders and challengers. They came like moths to flame, drawn by her power, consumed by their own ambition. But something about this one felt different, more dangerous, more real. The great doors of her chamber swung open with a sound like breaking bones. The woman who entered was beautiful in the way that poisonous flowers are beautiful, captivating and deadly. Her hair was the color of spilled wine, her skin pale as moonlight on snow. She wore a gown that seemed to be cut from the fabric of night itself, and her eyes were the dit purple of bruises, ancient and knowing. "Hello, dear sister," the woman said, her voice a melody that made the very stones of the palace shiver. "I am Seraphina. I have come to claim what is rightfully mine." Morrigan turned from the mirror, her own ethereal beauty a stark contrast to the newcomer's darker allure. "Sister, I was unaware that Belial had been so prolific in his later years." Seraphina laughed, a sound like silver bells in a graveyard. "Not Belial's daughter, sweet Morrigan. I am something far older, far more terrible. I am the first of our kind, the original succubus, the mother of shadows. And you, my dear, have been playing with toys that belong to me." The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. Frost began to form on the windows, and the flames in the braziers flickered and dimmed. Morrigan felt something she had not experienced in centuries, a chill of genuine unease. "The first succubus died long ago," Morrigan said, her voice steady despite the growing cold. "The histories speak of her destruction in the war between realms." "Histories," Seraphina spat. "Written by the victors, as always. I was not destroyed, merely displaced, cast into the void between worlds, feeding on the despair of the lost and forgotten. But I have grown strong, Morrigan. Strong enough to return, strong enough to reclaim my throne." Seraphina raised her hand, and the very air began to bend and twist around her fingers. Reality itself seemed to fray at the edges, revealing glimpses of something vast and terrible lurking just beyond perception. "You have done well as a caretaker, child. But the game is over. Surrender your power to me, and I will grant you a quick death." Morrigan's eyes blazed with emerald fire. "You mistake me for someone who cowers before empty threats. I am the Queen of Makai, heir to powers that predate your forgotten realm. If you want my throne, you'll have to take it." The battle that followed was not fought with mere physical force, but with the very essence of their beings. Seraphina struck first, her form dissolving into shadow and nightmare. The darkness rushed toward Morrigan like a living thing, seeking to engulf her, to drain her of her vital force. But Morrigan was ready. She transformed into her true form, a being of pure energy and desire, her body becoming a conduit for the primal forces of Makai. Their clash shook the palace to its foundations. Windows exploded inward, showering the room with crystalline fragments. The walls themselves began to bleed, weaving crimson tears that hissed and steamed where they touched the floor. Seraphina's assault was relentless, waves of crushing despair and soul-deep cold that sought to freeze Morrigan's very essence. "You cannot win," Seraphina hissed, her voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I have fed on the anguish of 10,000 worlds. I have grown fat on the tears of the abandoned. What are you but a spoiled child playing at being queen?" But Morrigan had learned something in her centuries of rule that Seraphina, in her eons of exile, had forgotten. Power was not just about taking, it was about giving, about connection, about the bonds that tied ruler to realm. As Seraphina's darkness pressed in around her, Morrigan reached out not just with her own strength, but with the combined will of all Makai. The demons of her realm, from the mightiest lords to the smallest imps, felt their queen's call. They poured their essence into her, not because they were commanded to, but because they chose to. Their loyalty was not born of fear, but of respect earned through centuries of just rule. The tide of battle turned. Morrigan's emerald fire blazed brighter, fed by the devotion of her subjects. Seraphina's darkness began to waver, to retreat. For the first time in millennia, the ancient succubus felt something she had thought herself incapable of. Fear. Impossible, Serafina gasped, her form becoming more solid, more vulnerable. You are nothing, a pretender, a usurper of my birthright. I am what you never were, Morrigan replied, her voice now carrying the weight of absolute authority. I am a queen who serves her people as much as they serve her. You ruled through fear and hunger. I rule through understanding and desire freely given. The final exchange was swift and decisive. Serafina, weakened by her inability to comprehend the source of Morrigan's power, made one last desperate attempt to drain her opponent's life force. But as she reached out with her soul-stealing touch, Morrigan did something unexpected. She opened herself completely, allowing Serafina to see not just her power but her purpose. The ancient succubus recoiled as if burned. What she saw in Morrigan's essence was not the selfish hunger she expected, but something far more complex, a genuine love for her realm and its inhabitants, a deep understanding of the responsibility that came with power, and a strength that came not from domination but from service. You are not like me, Serafina whispered, her form beginning to fade. You are not like me at all. No, Morrigan agreed, her own form returning to its human appearance. I am not, and that is why I will remain queen while you return to the void you came from. Serafina's final words were not a curse or a threat, but something like wonder. Perhaps there is another way to be what we are. Perhaps I have been wrong about so very much. As the ancient succubus faded back into the space between worlds, not destroyed but transformed by her encounter with true power, Morrigan felt a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. She had won, but at the cost of sending another of her kind back into exile. The palace began to repair itself, the bleeding walls sealing, the shattered windows reforming. The demons of Makai, having felt their queen's victory through their psychic bond, began to celebrate throughout the realm. But Morrigan stood alone in her chamber, looking out at the twisted spires of her domain, wondering if Serafina had been right about one thing, whether there might indeed be another way to be what they were. The midnight bells of Makai tolled again, but this time they rang only 12 times, marking the return of natural order to the demon realm. Morrigan Aensland remained queen, but she was changed by her encounter with the ancient succubus. In defeating Serafina, she had not just preserved her throne, she had discovered something profound about the nature of power itself. In the days that followed, her rule became even more just, even more compassionate. She began to reach out to the forgotten and the lost, offering them purpose and place in her realm. Some said she was trying to prevent another Serafina from arising. Others whispered that she had glimpsed something in the ancient succubus's eyes, a loneliness so vast and terrible that it had driven her to madness. Whatever the truth, Morrigan never spoke of that night again. But sometimes, in the deepest hours of darkness, she would stand before her mirror and wonder if somewhere in the void between worlds, Serafina was learning to be something more than hunger and shadow, and in those moments she would send a silent prayer into the darkness, not for forgiveness but for understanding. The crown of Makai remained on her head, but it no longer felt like a burden or a prize. It felt like what it had always been meant to be, a responsibility, a calling, and a chance to prove that even demons could choose to be something better than their nature suggested. And in the obsidian palace, where the mirrors reflected souls instead of faces, Morrigan Aensland continued to rule, forever changed by her encounter with the darkness that she might have become.